Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to RSIS seminar. I'm Alvin, Senior Fellow at RSIS, and basically I work on global nuclear issues. And today the topic of this seminar is on navigating nuclear risks. Should South Korea go nuclear? Or shall I put it more appropriately, can South Korea actually go nuclear? Right. Well, to be honest, I think this basically is an age-old debate on whether South Korea should have nuclear weapons or not. And frankly speaking, I actually enjoy going to South Korea. I think many of us do as well. So I always start to imagine, what if one day, if South Korea decides to leave the NPT and decides to deploy its own nuclear weapons, will I actually be going there again? And more importantly is on the issue of what do the citizens of South Korea actually think if they do have nuclear weapons? Because as the title suggests, it's basically a nuclear risk that they would have to live with. So today we are indeed very honored to have with us Professor Moon to dwell on this topic. Professor Moon, he was formerly based in Vienna, but he has now returned to Seoul. And he's James Lanny Distinguished Professor at the Yonsei University. He's also the Vice Chair of the Asia-Pacific Leadership Network for Non-Proliferation as well as Nuclear Disarmament. Prior to his very distinguished titles in the academic sector, he was formerly special advisor to former ROK presidents, and he was also the ambassador for international security affairs at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Trade. So to tell us more about this topic, over to you, Prof. Moon.
Alvin, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I have an announcement before I get into my talk. I'm editor-in-chief of a magazine, quarterly journal called Global Asia, and I will just circulate around you. And when you go out, and there is a note. If you write down your name and email address, you'll get the free subscription. It's my bonus to you. North Korean nuclear issue has been a big issue, but for the time being, it just evaporated. Nobody talked about North Korean nuclear. For example, I was in Vienna from September to December last year, and I was expecting a lot of lecture invitation for North Korean nuclear, but there was none. Okay, all the European universities and think tanks were interested in East Asia without the US. That was a topic, but nobody was talking about nuclear issues. But since US-Israeli attack on Iran, all of a sudden I've been getting a lot of phone calls from BBC and CNN and whatever to make a comment on its implication for North Korea. Therefore, I will start with that story. And I really don't think that the United States will take any offensive move on North Korea. Reason are several. First, North Korea has nuclear weapons. Israel does not have nuclear weapons. That's the first difference. Second, Iran has Israel. North Korea does not have Israel. South Korea doesn't want to be Israel. Some people argue that, how about Japan? Japan can play a role of Israel in provoking attack on North Korea. But I think Japan is also very much subdued. Therefore, there are no Israeli factor on North Korea. Third, Iran has a weak domestic political base, okay? And there were signs of domestic opposition to Islamic establishment. But in North Korea, there is no such a sign. As you can see in the 9th Party Congress of Korea Workers' Party, Kim Jong-un's political leadership seems to be formed. Therefore, there is no pulling effect from Pyongyang with regard to U.S. and military action on North Korea. Fourth, Iran does not have China and Russia, but North Korea has China and Russia, and both North Korea is adjunct to northeastern China and Russia and Far East. And also North Korea has deployed a lot of strategic weapons along the borderlines. Therefore, it won't be easy for the U.S. to take any kinds of military actions to those areas without provoking China and Russia. Therefore, that big power politics, factor in. And also, cost of war matters. I really don't think that U.S. can unfold the two-theater wars. Okay, the U.S. is spending almost $960 million per day, and I really don't think that the U.S. has such a kind of capability to conduct war on North Korea. And finally, I think that Kim Jong-un and Trump have a very special relationship. Kim Jong-un has shown his reverence to Trump, and Trump has been treating Kim Jong-un like a son. Therefore, they have a very special relationship. And that would serve as a very important deterrent. Therefore, I can tell you that it is very highly unlikely that the United States will take any action on North Korea. With this background on, but what went wrong with North Korea? Okay, whole this nuclear fiasco on the Korean Peninsula was embedded in Korean security situation. Okay, after the Korean War, President Lee Sung-man, the first president of the Republic of Korea, wanted to have nuclear, programs with the hope that South Korea would have nuclear weapons. Of course, that didn't work it out. But President Park Chung-hee wanted to develop the nuclear weapons very clandestinely in 1970s. But that was detected by the United States. His effort was aborted. And I think around that time, particularly starting from 60s, but in 70s, North Korea expedited the process of nuclear weapons program. Therefore, it is interactive rather than just one side. Then in 1994, we came across the first nuclear crisis. Okay, North Korea was not cooperative with verification and inspection efforts by IAEA, and at a time that there was a renewal of NPT regime, and Clinton administration very much concerned if North Korea cannot be stopped, the entire NPT regime can collapse. Therefore, at a time, William Perry, Secretary of Defense, was deliberating on surgical strike on nuclear facilities in Yongbyon. Okay. At the final moment, he just suspended that effort. The most important reason, according to Dr. Perry, and I had a personal conversation with him, that he got the report from the Gary Luck, U.S. commander in South Korea. Within 60 days of their military action, there will be about 1 million casualties, okay, and in Korea within 60 days of initiation of the conflict. And Dr. Perry told me that at that point he decided not to attack. And then Jimmy Carter visited Pyongyang in the first week of June, and he had a deal with Kim Il-sung, and Kim Il-sung agreed to resolve the issue through dialogue and negotiation. Then in October, there was the Geneva Agreed Framework in 1994, and that led to the negotiated settlement of the problem. The Geneva Agreed Framework was very straightforward. North Korea will freeze its nuclear activities until 2003, when the United States complete the construction of 2 light water nuclear reactors in Sinpo. Okay. Meanwhile, up until that time, the United States would provide North Korea with 50,000 metric tons of heavy oil, okay, and South Korea, Japan, and even EU kept the money for the construction of a light water nuclear reactor. Everything was going well, but it was just slow. It was slow, the process. U.S. Congress was not supportive, particularly Congress Republican members of the U.S. Congress were extremely critical of Clinton deal with North Korea. But still, it was moving. Then they come to the second nuclear crisis in 2002 and 2003. In year 2000, George W. Bush won the election. And John Bolton was appointed as Undersecretary of State for Political and Security Affairs. He was the most hawkish person, and he was trying to derail the Geneva Agreement framework. And then he argued that North Korea has been clandestinely developing highly enriched uranium program. Yes, North Korea has frauds. It's a PU, plutonium program, but North Korea clandestinely developing highly enriched uranium program. Okay, and also in October 2003, October 2002, James Kelly, then Assistant Secretary of State for Asia Pacific, and American delegation visited Pyongyang, had negotiation with Kang Seok-ju, his counterpart. And Mr. Kelly was arguing that you got to admit that you got to confess that you have a highly enriched uranium program. But Kang Seok-ju answered that, no, we don't have it, okay? But his wording was this, but we can have more critical, program than, HEU. Then the American delegation concluded that there is admission of the existence of a highly enriched uranium program. Since then on, Bush administration virtually derailed the Geneva Agreement framework. It just debunked KEDO, Korea Energy Development Organization, and stopped the construction of light water nuclear reactor, and stopped the supply of heavy oil to North Korea. The North Korean response was very straightforward. Starting from April 2003, it began to reactivate 5 megawatt nuclear reactor in Yongbyon. And then things get, complicated. There's another, attempt too. Then immediately afterwards, and at a time, the Nomian government, South Korea, pushed very hard, and with the mediation of China, and North Korea and the United States agreed to set up the six-party talks. China served as a chair country, and everything went very well. And they even, September 19th, 2004, the delegates of six-party talks even adopted the September 19th joint statement in Beijing. The agreement was superb because North Korea committed to the complete elimination of nuclear program. United States committed to the full diplomatic normalization, and also all the parties agreed to create the peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, and even they agreed to create the Northeast Asian multilateral security cooperation regime to facilitate the transition to peace on the Korean Peninsula. But they signed that joint statement on September 19th, but September 21st, Monday, and U.S. Treasury Department issued a Federal Register saying that Banco Delta Asia in Macau has been illegal transaction with North Korea. Therefore, the U.S. Treasury Department just issued, order to freeze North Korean bank account in Banco Delta Asia. The amount was $25 million. The North Koreans were infuriated. You're saying that you will give up the hostile intention and hostile policy of North Korea, that 2 days after that joint statement, now you are imposing sanction, which is a very critical sign of hostility on the part of the United States. That dragged on, okay? Only after North Korea undertook the first nuclear testing on October 9th, 2006, George W. Bush agreed to engage in dialogue with North Korea. Then it took almost 3.5 years to resolve this Banco Delta Asia sanction on North Korea. Meanwhile, North Korea began to lose patience. But afterwards, there was a further agreement with the intervention of South Korea. Okay, but again, all the issue of verification, inspection, that derailed the negotiation effort. Then afterwards, there was a couple of the occasions in which the U.S. could have made a deal with North Korea, but every moment, Murphy's law prevailed. Nothing worked out. Then now North Korea has nuclear facilities. Therefore, it has PU facilities in Yongbyon, and it has HEU, highly enriched uranium facilities in Yongbyon, Gangsan, and one more areas. But some people argue that more than 2 more areas. Okay, and it has nuclear materials. Now North Korea is known to have acquired at least 50 to 70 kilograms of plutonium and about 1,077 to 2,500 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. It has nuclear materials too. And nuclear bombs, SPIRI, Stockholm Peace Institute, come up with about 50 nuclear warheads. South Korea Ministry of National Defense has come up with about 120. But a lot of experts argue that North Korea should have acquired about 50 to 75 nuclear warheads. But the whole issue is the North Korean nuclear capability has been on the rise. Okay? And North Korea has all kinds of delivery vehicles, short-range cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and particularly threatening is multiple launcher rockets. North Korea has recently showed 600 millimeter multiple launching rockets, very powerful. Its range is about 300 to 400 kilometers. Therefore, it can cover most of South Korea. They have lots of these multiple launchers. It has short-range ballistic missiles like Nodong, and also it has various middle-range and intermediate-range ballistic missile and intercontinental ballistic missile, Hwasong 11, Hwasong 21, okay? And also North Korea has proven that it has SLBM, submarine launched ballistic missile. Therefore, North Korea has a delivery vehicle. There is a debate whether North Korea has ICBM capability or not. As you all know, if you look at the case of Minuteman, you should have taken at least 15 to 17 rounds of testing. But North Korea hasn't done that. There's a lot of experts argue that North Korea lacks ICBM capability. But as the short range and medium range, intermediate range, and North Korea has a delivery capability. And North Korea undertook 6 rounds of nuclear testing. Okay. And particularly 6th round of nuclear testing was extremely successful. And North Korea claims it is a hydrogen bomb. But a person like Siegfried Hecker, Dr. Hecker argued that it is short of a hydrogen bomb. It has shown, even though it has shown, 150, kiloton, the explosive power, but a lot of, the Siegfried Hecker argued that it must be boosted in an atomic bomb rather than hydrogen bomb. Anyhow, but North Korea has shown that it has succeeded in nuclear testing. And most recently, North Korea has been arguing that we have a diversified nuclear bombs, meaning what? Atomic bomb, boosted atomic bomb, and hydrogen bomb. And also North Korea has argued that it has miniaturized nuclear bomb. It has made the nuclear bombs lighter so that they can mount on, they can put the multiple warhead in ICBM, and also, they can, they argue that they have produced a tactical nuclear warhead, okay? But problem is this, even though North Korea has such a nuclear capability, North Korea's position has been very clear-cut. That what North Korea has been arguing that we abide by the non-first use principles. Therefore, North Korean doctrine is that its nuclear weapons is defense purposes, not offensive purposes. But Russian invasion of Ukraine, North Korea began to change it. The Kim Jong-un used the term second mission of nuclear weapons. Second mission what? Even if North Korea is not hit by the American nuclear weapons, if North Korean territory and sovereignty are being jeopardized, then we are entitled to use the nuclear bomb preemptively. Okay? And in the past, North Korean target used to be the United States or Guam, okay, or American military bases in Japan. North Korea has been arguing that the South Korea is one people, therefore we are not going to hurt the South Korean people, whatever. These days, they completely changed it. Their primary focus is South Korea, okay? And they argue that they have acquired a tactical nuclear warhead, and they have created 8 companies that handles tactical nuclear warhead. Even Kim Jong-un declared that he had deployed 8 tactical nuclear companies along the front line. But we cannot verify, okay? Because North Korea can use those tactical nuclear warheads by using conventional delivery devices. Therefore, it is very difficult to tell. Then North Korean nuclear doctrine has fundamentally changed. Therefore, they are now targeting South Korea. Therefore, we are facing existential threat from North Korea. Then how have we been dealing with the North Korean nuclear threat? But here, I have been dealing with North Korean nuclear issue since 1990s. And I think the one fundamental mistake on our part, South Korea, Japan, the United States, is that we always thought that the time is on our side. Time is not on the North Korean side. Assuming that our sanctions are working, therefore Kim Jong-un has very limited waiting capacity. Therefore, Kim Jong-un either surrender or collapse. That was thank you. There is kinds of logic which he used to hold. Therefore, our approach has been, on the one hand, okay, extended deterrence, or these days we call it integrated deterrence, that combines conventional deterrence with extended nuclear deterrence. That the deterrence is one thing. At the same time, we have been pursuing compellence. Okay, if we pursue deterrence, it is very stable. But when we began to pursue compellence strategy, meaning changing North Korean behavior, meaning what? Try to North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons, okay? Then North Korean attitude will be very different. Therefore, this combination of deterrence and compellence didn't lead us to nowhere. It made the situation get worsened, okay? And at the same time, we have been trying to pursue, dialogue, engagement, negotiation, okay? But while we are pursuing, because we haven't given up hostile intent in North Korea, we haven't given up the sanction card on North Korea. Therefore, our other strategic, component was involved, strategic patience on the one hand, at the same time, continuation and intensification of sanctions and isolation of North Korea, and hopefully leading to regime change in North Korea. The final card was the military action. But South Korea has been strongly opposed to the idea of a military action, okay, since 1994. And in fact, Dr. William Perry could not take a military surgical strike against the nuclear facility in Yongbyon in May 1994, not only because of these casualty issues, but also because of very strong opposition by the South Korean government, Kim Il-sung government. Okay. Kim Il-sung government at the time openly argued that if you make a military strike on North Korea, we are not going to join you. Okay, then signaling end of alliance. Okay. But likewise, our approach of North Korea has varied from the very classical deterrence to compellence, dialogue and negotiation, and regime change, sanctions and regime change, and even military action. But none of them worked. Okay. And under this kind of situation, now we begin to realize that North Korean nuclear threat has been increasing, and how to deal with it. And therefore, we detected some changes from American side, because recently, since about 10 years ago, we began to question the reliability of American extended nuclear deterrence. Okay, and therefore, we began to argue that there got to be more clear sign of American commitment for the defense of South Korea against North Korea. We are talking of American nuclear umbrella, but we do not see any concrete evidence of American nuclear umbrella. Therefore, conservatives in South Korea began to argue that North Korea should relocate its tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea. The United States used to maintain over 980 tactical nuclear weapons up until 1991. But when Senior Bush was the president, he decided to withdraw those 980 tactical nuclear weapons from South Korea. That involves gravity bombs and just even nuclear mines and whatever. But problem, therefore, the conservatives in South Korea have been arguing that the U.S. should retransfer those tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea. That is the surest way to ensure nuclear deterrence against North Korea. But there is an American dilemma. First of all, North Korea does not have the stocks of tactical nuclear weapons. Since early 1990s, North Korea, the United States, eliminated all the tactical nuclear bombs. Now they have about 200 tactical nuclear bombs in Europe, and the Maine and U.S. does not have any discernible stocks of tactical nuclear warhead. Therefore, they cannot spare, and they cannot get into the production of new tactical nuclear weapons. That is the first dilemma. And second dilemma is that the American nuclear strategists argue that redeploying tactical nuclear weapons will not do a good service to South Korea and the United States. It will enhance de-escalation. It will enhance escalation rather than de-escalation, because nowadays North Korea has strike capabilities. Therefore, if North Korea senses any hostile intention from U.S. and South Korean side, North Korea can engage in preemptive strikes. Now it has all kinds of missiles, okay, and many missiles. Therefore, it will be easier North Korea to strike American tactical nuclear site in South Korea. Therefore, it's destabilizing rather than stabilizing. Therefore, and also, in 1991, when the Senior Bush decided to withdraw American nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons in South Korea, is at a time there was a strong anti-American sentiment in South Korea. At a time, American government was concerned about possible, the stealing by the radical Korean, young nationalists and whatever. Okay, but there is the same concern, how to maintain the secure, the deployment of American tactical nuclear weapons. Therefore, overall, the United States said no. And then South Korean conservative, came up with another option, that was a nuclear sharing. Okay, NATO has a nuclear sharing with the United States. Okay, then nuclear sharing means what? Most importantly, American nuclear weapons should be present, okay, and it should be co-shared. Through what? Through joint planning, joint nuclear planning. Second, intelligence sharing. Third, joint conduct of nuclear weapons. And now 6 European countries house American tactical nuclear weapons, like Germany. For example, according to nuclear sharing, German fighters can carry American nuclear bomb and drop. Of course, ultimate decision will be made by the American president, and it will be managed by the American military officers. But the German fighters can carry them to the enemy side. Therefore, South Korea wanted that one, particularly the conservatives in South Korea. But again, U.S. was saying that it is impossible. U.S. Congress, particularly Senate, will never rectify it. And you may know Senator Edward Markey is the most influential person in the Senate on nuclear issues. Therefore, the American side was telling that we don't have a power and influence to make Senate to rectify that kind of nuclear sharing. That is why in 2023, when President Yoon Suk-yeol visited Washington, President Biden came up with kinds of compromise. There was the adoption of Washington Declaration. Instead of going for nuclear sharing, they adopted the so-called Washington Declaration. In accordance with the Washington Declaration, the US and South Korea agreed to set up the Nuclear Consultative Group. And then they will discuss, the Nuclear Consultative Group will discuss about nuclear planning, intelligence sharing, okay, and division of labor, in which South Korea will handle conventional deterrence, the US will handle nuclear deterrence. Okay? It is a declaration, but President Biden made it very clear that we are committed. But in return for that, the President Yoon Suk-yeol made a firm commitment to the American government that the South Korea will abide by the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty. South Korea will not pursue any effort for nuclear weapons. Okay? No reprocessing, okay? No enrichment. Therefore, it's a very interesting swap between the South Korean, American commitment and South Korean commitment not to go for independent nuclear weapons acquisition. And even though there was a Washington Declaration, particularly since the President Trump emerged, now particularly, again, I'm saying conservative, but progressive in South Korea, liberals in South Korea, they are opposed in the pursuit of nuclear weapons, whatever. But conservative in South Korea now have shown very concern about the Trump administration's commitment, okay? And therefore they are saying that we got to think about independent nuclear weapons acquisition. Okay? But there are two schools in the conservative. One school, what I call the teleological school. Another school is instrumental school. Teleological school argues that regardless of the United States, whether the United States provide extended deterrence or not, South Korea should for the nuclear weapons. Okay. The only way to deal with North Korean nukes is for us to acquire nuclear weapons. There's a firm commitment. But instrumental school argue differently. Okay. We can use this nuclear card in changing North Korean behavior, Chinese behavior, and American behavior. North Korean behavior is very simple. Okay, don't try to blackmail with your nuclear weapons. We can acquire nuclear weapons easily. Okay, then message to China. If China doesn't really help North Korea get rid of nuclear weapons, we'll have nuclear weapons while maintaining alliance with the United States. Therefore, we can put the pressure on China in such a way that China can exert influence on North Korea. Okay, the United States, if the United States really commit its nuclear, deterrence, okay, extended nuclear deterrence, so South Korea will go nuclear. Therefore, instrumentalists argue that by using those three rationales, that we should play with the nuclear card. Okay. then what is the current status, Therefore, whether it's the teleological or instrumental, their basic argument is this. First of all, the only way to deal with the North Korean nuclear challenge is for us to have nuclear weapons. That is the only way. The simple logic. That's a simple nuclear deterrence logic. That is number one reason. Number two reason, we cannot trust the U.S. Okay, U.S. will never sacrifice Los Angeles or San Francisco for the protection of Seoul. Okay, therefore it's the same in the early 1960s. Therefore at that time, there was a big argument saying that the U.S. would not protect Berlin by sacrificing New York. Therefore, Europeans began to raise the suspicion on the concept of extended nuclear deterrence. The same logic works out. And third important point is this. Some figures in Washington from the think tank and some Washington pundits have been arguing that it is okay for South Korea and Japan to have nuclear weapons. Okay, reason. But for example, Eldridge Colby. Now he is not making the statement these days after he became Undersecretary of Defense. Prior to that, he was arguing that look, our greatest strategy is China. In order to pursue strategy of denial, okay, we should allow Japan and South Korea to have nuclear weapons. Then aggregation of American nuclear capability with South Korean and Japanese nuclear capabilities will make a more credible deterrence against China. But there's a growing number of people in the United States endorsing the idea of Japan and South Korea going nuclear. Therefore, those hardline conservatives in South Korea has been capitalizing on that one. Therefore, Trump is changing the view. Okay, a lot of so-called MAGA guys, MAGA people, they would endorse South Korea going nuclear. And fourth, rationale they're arguing is this. A lot of non-proliferation scholars have been arguing that if South Korea go to nuclear, then South Korea will be facing daunting challenges from international community through sanctions and etc. But they argue that look at Israel, look at India, look at Pakistan. Even though they adopted, they acquired the nuclear weapons, they survived. Why can't we, go for nuclear? There was threat of sanction will be minimum. And also they argue that a lot of people talk about the negative impact on the civilian nuclear industry in South Korea. They argue that if we can handle economic sanction issues, then the sanction on the civilian nuclear industry will be minimum. Therefore, they argue that we can go ahead. Okay, but I personally don't buy this argument. Okay, the reason, from strategic point of view, okay, which one is better for security of South Korea? For me, it is much more beneficial for us to rely on the United States and not go nuclear path. But if we acquire nuclear weapons, North Korea will be increasing its nuclear weapons capability. Okay, look, North Korea has been under sanction of international society for the past 70 years. Yet, North Korea is keep producing nuclear weapons, keep producing missiles. Okay? There are holes in international sanction regime. Therefore, if North Korea can do it, even under the very severe sanctions, if South Korea begin to go for nuclear, then North Korea can easily expedite the process. And also China and Russia will help North Korea to do that. Therefore, inter-Korean arms race, particularly nuclear arms race, will be intensified. And also, while we maintain alliance with the United States, and if we possess nuclear weapons, China and Russia will treat us differently. Russia will treat us as a real enemy. Okay? And China, in particular northeastern part of China, particularly the Shenyang area, and Russian Far East, they have amassed quite, large amount of so-called nuclear weapons, strategic weapons. South Korea can be number one target, even prior to Japan. Therefore, from strategic point of view, for us to have a nuclear weapons will be a curse rather than a blessing. And second, we tend to, the particularly conservative in South Korea, tend to treat the nuclear issue very lightly. Given my understanding, those non- or anti-proliferation forces in Washington is much stronger than those who favor South Korea, Japan going nuclear. Much stronger and institutionalized in Washington, D.C. If South Korea goes to nuclear, defying American opposition, then it will bear a very profound implication for the future of ROK-US alliance. And more than that, if we have nuclear weapons, why the hell we would listen to the US? The reason why we are going for nuclear is to have a greater strategic autonomy, okay? And if we do not listen to the American wishes and demands, why the hell US shouldn't maintain alliance with South Korea? Therefore, I would say that if our, the pursuit of nuclear weapons will greatly jeopardize the ROK-US alliance. And third, sanctions will be real, okay? I still remember, I was working for the government in 2004 and 2005. And 2005, IAEA inspection team came to Korea, and they were making inspection of Korea Atomic Energy Research Institute. They uncovered laser-based enrichment of 0.2 gram of uranium. That was a big issue. That was a broad case to the board of IAEA. And at the time, French and the British government, most critical, and they insisted that the case should be transferred to Security Council for sanction against South Korea. Okay. South Korea. So sanction against South Korea. Therefore, and our government sent delegation to Vienna to persuade, British and the French delegation, but they didn't buy it. But the very fact, because at the time our government position is this, they did for experimental purposes, 0.2 gram. That's a really minimum. But the IAEA point is very simple. If you can enrich 0.2 gram, then enriching 2 gram, 20 gram, 2 kilogram would be much easier. Okay? And first of all, you violated NPT safeguard. And even the United States was deliberating on the taking side with British and French government and transferring to Security Council. And obviously, China and Russia would love to give a sanction, but final moment, the President Nomen sent a delegation to Washington, persuaded, and that we'll never do it again. And then we get rid of all this laser-based enrichment program and then our Atomic Research Institute. And then at that point, United States accepted our proposal, persuaded the French and British in the government, and did not transfer the case to the Security Council. But that shows the degree of sensitivity on the part of those who have nuclear weapons. Therefore, economic sanctions on our civilian nuclear industry will be quite profound. Look, now we have 28 nuclear reactors. South Korea has become one of the most competitive exporters of a nuclear reactor. But once we decide to go to nuclear, first of all, allocate U.S. civilian atomic cooperation accord will be invalidated. Then U.S. will be entitled to taking back all the equipment, materials, which were given to South Korea. Okay? And nuclear supply group will suspend the supply of uranium to South Korea. Okay? And also, U.S. has been applying for the Article 1 to 3 of Atomic Energy Act of 1954. Therefore, no country will buy nuclear reactors from South Korea, which are violating NPT and IAEA and safeguard clause. Therefore, those guys who are arguing that if we have alliance with the United States, if we have an Israeli type of lobby, then we can persuade the American government. It's not simply American government, okay? And all those who have not nuclear weapons will take side against South Korea. Therefore, it will be quite serious. And also, another big issue is what? South Korea will be first democratic country that withdraw from NPT regime. That will be shame on our international reputation. Therefore, it is not easy to go for independent nuclear pass. Okay, but situation is not very optimistic. Okay, first of all, almost 70% of South Korean people support South Korea's pursuit of independent nuclear weapons. But it is also variable. It is also variable. In 2018, when inter-Korean relations were very good, those who support the possession of independent nuclear weapons was less than 30%. But when North Korea undertook sixth nuclear testing, and North Korea shows a very provocative military behavior, the figure goes to almost 70%. Okay? And also if citizens are educated about the economic, political, and strategic cost of going independent nuclear path, the support rate goes down. Okay? Therefore, it is variable, but still, from general impression, a large number of South Koreans support South Korea going nuclear weapons. And another big issue is when President Park Chung-in attempted to acquire nuclear weapons, but it was detected by CIA and entire effort was aborted. Since then on, nuclear taboo was kind of dominant norm in Korean society, but it's now being eroded. That is really concerning one. And also another important point is this, I just missed talking about. If South Korea decides to go to independent nuclear path, it will definitely bring about nuclear domino in Northeast Asia. A lot of conservatives in Japan will be waiting South Korea to go to pass. As you know, Japan can enrich uranium. Japan can reprocess spent fuel rods. Japan has a large number of plutonium. It has a quite large number of enriched uranium. Of course, they are not weapons grade, but given Japanese technological capability and capital availability, they can turn them into weapons grade very easily. Therefore, if South Korea goes to nuclear, it will trigger Japan go to nuclear, Taiwan will go to nuclear. All three countries have motives, has financial capability, technological capability. Therefore, Northeast Asia much smaller than Southeast Asia. But all Northeastern countries, imagine all North Korean countries having nuclear weapons. That would be like a hell, Anyhow, then how to solve the problem? In conclusion, okay. Anyhow, my conclusion is very simple. Going nuclear is a bad and risk choice, and cost is much and higher than benefit. Second, we should find out some diplomatic ways of resolving the problem. Okay? And one way is what? We can think about nuclear weapons-free zone in Northeast Asia. That means what? Those who have nuclear weapons, make sure that they come up with negative security assurance for those who do not have nuclear weapons. Those who are about to have nuclear weapons, make sure to give up their nuclear weapons, make a full security assurance by those who have nuclear weapons. And also they should come up with a new security architecture in Northeast Asia. Okay? And for me, I think that allocate U.S. extended or integrated nuclear deterrence is working. The problem is this. What is important is the North Korean perception of American nuclear threat, right? What is important is what is the North Korean assessment of American intention, American capability, and American political will, whether they are willing to use nuclear weapons or not. But in South Korea, our, perception of American intention, American capability, and American, political will is more important than North Korean perception of the American capability, intention, and will. That really complicates the situation. Therefore, I would argue that we should be more rational in assessing the nature of nuclear deterrence on the Korean Peninsula. And also, we need to be very, very realistic, okay? Now, North Korea has nuclear weapons. Now, that's a fact. Of course, we cannot recognize North Korea as a ninth nuclear weapon state because we are a member of NPT. According to the NPT norms and principles, we cannot recognize North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. However, we should be aware of North Korea's nuclear weapons capability. This being the case, then you cannot come up with the idea of denuclearization first. Why North Korea would denuclearize? North Korean constitution says that we are a nuclear weapon state. We are not going to give up nuclear weapons. Okay? Kim Chung-in has been making that statement all the time. Therefore, we should be very, very realistic. Therefore, instead of putting denuclearization at the entrance of any dialogue or negotiation, we should put the denuclearization at the exit of negotiation with North Korea. Then what should we do? I think President Lee Jae-myung made a very sensible approach. He was saying that we should start with the freezing of North Korean nuclear activities and missile activities, freeze. And then second stage, reducing, rolling back and reducing North Korean nuclear and missile arsenals. As for the denuclearization or Korean Peninsula without nukes should be long-term goal. Therefore, President Lee Jae-myung is trying to manage stability, okay? Even if he is making de facto, he is realizing de facto North Korean possession of nuclear weapons. I think the President Trump has a similar view too. But the State Department, Pentagon, South Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs would strongly oppose this idea. They still, whole past dependence matters. They have been pounding on the idea of denuclearization first, okay? Even denuclearization of North Korea, even not denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Because our previous government, Yoon Suk-yeol government, has been arguing for denuclearization of North Korea as a precondition for any meaningful dialogue with North Korea. There was no progress at all. Therefore, we need to be very, very realistic in dealing with North Korea. But ultimately, it's not only inter-Korean relations, but also Northeast Asian security architecture per se. They are very, very critical components in dealing with North Korea. North Korea will never give up its nuclear weapons as long as there are threat environments suppressing North Korea. Okay? Therefore, creating security environments in which North Korea can live safely until they perceive that kind of security environment. It will be very tough. Okay, I will stop here. I think I talked too much.
Well, thank you very much, Prof. Moon, for that very comprehensive exposition on the South Koreans' approach to managing nuclear risk posed by North Korea. I like the term you use, nuclear risk, instead of nuclear threats posed by North, and that actually reflects a shift in the thinking of how you actually, the element of hostility is probably not there when you deal with, the North Korea situation. I also like to ask about when you mentioned that we have seen that the present administration, President Lee's administration, of freezing and subsequently arms reduction, and ultimately you get to the end goal of a denuclearization. How does that approach been received by by the DPRK? Has any progress been made so far? Are they receptive to this more kind of a gradual approach rather than a hard-on denuclearization as being put forth by the previous administration?
There was no progress because there was no dialogue. And the North Korean nuclear issue has been completely sidelined. And therefore, I think what is urgent at this present moment is very close consultation between Seoul and Washington on the conditions of those exchanges. Okay, if North Korea freezes its nuclear activities and missile activities, what can the US and South Korea, even Japan, provide North Korea with? Okay, therefore, for example, I would propose that the US would come up with a diplomatic normalization, only for suspension alone, okay? And also, the suspension of joint military exercise and training, that could be another card, or the suspension of deployment of American strategic weapons to South Korea. Those kinds of can be used to card. Therefore, as for reduction, verifiable reduction, the United States should come up with a much bigger card, such as lifting of sanctions, particularly lifting of secondary boycott. Because now you cannot, wire money to North Korea. Therefore, people talk about investment in North Korea, but if you wanted to invest money, if you wanted to invest in North Korea, then you should carry cash with you. How can you carry, the cash to North Korea? Therefore, most important thing is the United States should lift the secondary boycott. Okay, those kinds of things, and also maybe if North Korea is willing to accept the verifiable reduction, okay, and President Trump can come up with some important investment package. And another one is, particularly North Koreans are very much interested in peaceful use of nuclear energy. Therefore, North Korea will want, North Korea give a 5 megawatt nuclear reactor, Magnox reactor, that can produce PU, weapons grade PU. Then by giving it up, then South Korea can come up with a Hanaro reactor. Okay? The South Korean Hanaro reactor is very, very, famous. Okay? And North Korea likes it too, the peaceful use. From Hanaro, you cannot produce weapons grade PU. Okay? But like that. And also we can come up with, should allow North Korea, enrich its uranium, not more than 20%. Okay? Those kinds of, and plus huge investment in North Korea. But Trump can do it if he makes, decision. But no other leaders can do that. But therefore, in other words, you got to come up with complete different ideas. Otherwise, North Korea is not likely to move, because North Korea has still, I think, the North Korean leader has a very strong feeling of betrayal since Hanoi. in April 2019. Therefore, in order to move Kim Jong-un, President Trump's proposal should be quite, surprising.
Yeah, I do agree that I was in Korea about 2 months ago, and basically the panel just discusses that if you want to have any kind of new radical policies to be changed, then this is probably the time for the U.S. to do it, because Trump's basically he doesn't really stands on the idea of legacy issues, and he just wants to do things differently, and he's very transactional. So can I perhaps also take some questions from the floor? If you just raise your hand and tell us your name and where you're from. Yes, please.
I'm Lam Ping-er, head of the Korea Center at the East Asian Institute, National University of Singapore. Professor Moon, thank you so much for your candid and very refreshing presentation. I have 3 short questions. The first is about Japan. You mentioned that in the scenario of South Korea going nuclear, then there might well be a domino effect, no? The erosion of the NPT regime, and Japan might well react accordingly. You know? But what if we were to turn your analysis on its head? It is not unthinkable and inconceivable that Japan may go nuclear before South Korea for its own reasons of domestic politics, distrust of the US extended nuclear deterrence down the road, or South Korea's fear, not only of, let me say that again, Japan's fear, not only about DPRK, but PRC. Because your talk is pretty much focused on DPRK, but not on PRC. But for Japan, it's always long-term conservative right-wing LDP government in power, not like South Korea, no, where you swing from left to right, left to right, left to right. Japan, most of the time, is a right-wing LTP government. So its consideration is just not DPRK, but also US and also PRC. So if, under certain circumstances, domestic politics, convergence of domestic politics, and its perception of external environment, it flirts with the idea to go nuclear, wouldn't that have implications or even an incentive for ROK to go nuclear? So that's my long-winded question number 1. Question number 2 is an observation that in 2016, Donald Trump, as a candidate for the US presidential election, mentioned that he thinks it's okay for ROK and Japan to go nuclear, simply because that means that US need not carry all the burdens of maintaining defense for its allies. The allies have to do more, and if US allies were to be responsible for their nuclear deterrence, I think it's okay. There's a precedent for it, because France and UK, France have its force de frappe, remains within NATO. UK has nuclear weapons, remain within NATO. So it is not inconceivable for US to maintain its alliance with ROK and Japan, while Japan and ROK go nuclear. I mean, that's the argument, And my third and last argument, question, is that, despite the left and right, conservative, progressive debate about engagement and deterrence towards DPRK, what if the DPRK, because the trust towards US is zero, right? The trust is zero. So what do they trust in? They trust in nuclear weapons. They look at Gaddafi, look at Saddam Hussein, they look at what happened to Maduro's, and you look at the Ayatollah, supreme leader, being assassinated. So what's the logical conclusion for DPRK? So what if the DPRK were to increase 50 nuclear warheads, 100 nuclear warheads, 200 nuclear warheads, 300, 500? What is ROK going to do? Are you going to just sit down there and debate among yourselves? Or are you going to force, by circumstances? It's not something which you like to do. You would very much prefer not to go nuclear. But if there's a big question mark about the reliability of US extended deterrence and the DPRK goes on from 50 to 100 to 200 to 500, what are you going to do? Thank you. I don't mean to be so dramatic, but for the sake of discussion. Thank you.
Powell raised very big questions. At first question, I think what is really concerning is this, that there are some scholars and pundits in South Korea and Japan who are talking about the joint nuclear weapons development between Japan and South Korea. Therefore, already, some form of alliance, coalition is being built between Japan and South Korea among hardcore, conservatives. But in the case of Japan, it will not be easy because you can go back to 1964 when China undertook first nuclear test. Since then on, Japan has been pushing for nuclear latency, okay? And therefore, there are elements in Japan who favors nuclear weaponization, but we cannot discount the power of pacifist group in Japan, particularly from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they are very well connected and organized. Okay, they have almost 80 years of citizen, power in opposing nuclear weaponization. And Komeito is one of the strongest opponents of South Japan going to nuclear weapons and whatever. Therefore, no, they can come back. It's not, the current Takaichi setup is not the final and permanent one. Japanese politics can go up and down. Therefore, in other words, depending upon overall mood, pacifist forces in Japan can pose a major threat. And also in the case of South Korea, now we have an Lee Jae-myung government, which is pacifist, the government. If it were Yoon Suk-yeol government, there could be close cooperation with Japan on that one. But I think Lee Jae-myung is very close to Takaichi. And Lee Jae-myung because Takaichi will be visiting Korea very soon. Okay, so toward the end of March and whatever. And I think, Lee Jae-myung will be kind of, break on, Takaichi going far right. Therefore, I'm hoping it, to the extent that their personal ties are very, very close. And also another important point is the American factor. I personally believe the US will never allow Japan to go nuclear. No. Okay, they never trust Japan. No, really, I've been, even though Washington has the largest so-called lobby group, so-called Christendom group, okay, and Jihua, the group, they're very strong in the defense and in the State Department. That means what? Those Japanese government, the American government officials who served in Japan, they have a huge number. They are the most important pro-Japanese forces in Washington, but they themselves oppose Japan going nuclear. Therefore, we should not take it for lightly. Okay. And second issue, I think Trump allows Japan and South Korea to go nuclear weapons, but it won't be easy. Okay, it should go through the congressional restraints, as pointed out. Article 123 of Atomic Energy Act of 1954 then matters, and also there are Glenn Amendment and several other legal works. Therefore, Trump's executive order alone will not allow Japan and South Korea go to nuclear. Therefore, it will not be easy for President Trump to facilitate Japan and South Korea to go for nuclear. Therefore, we should not take lightly the domestic opposition forces to nuclear proliferation in Washington, D.C. Third issue is a really critical issue. Therefore, President Lee Jae-myung's approach is, for example, therefore, time is not on our side. Therefore, what is important is this. We cannot make North Korea eliminate its own nuclear weapons. That's a fact and reality. But we can slow down the pace of North Korea nuclear build-up. Okay, we can create some kind of status quo within which we can maintain some sort of stability. Then it might be inevitable for us to live with North Korean nuclear weapons. However, if we build a friendly relationship, and there will be if we can create a condition under which North Korea has no reason to use nuclear weapons, okay, maybe we can achieve, peace, no matter how unstable. For him, unstable peace is better than having military conflict. Therefore, that is, Lee Jae-myung's pragmatic approach.
Yes, this gentleman.
Hi, Professor Mon. I'm Victor Teo from East Asian Institute, where Dr. Lam is working. I have a question. In your opinion, what is the role of China and Russia in the development of North Korea's nuclear program? Do you see them playing, what sort of role do you see them playing going forward? I mean, I remember that Xi Jinping was very unhappy with the nuclear test that the Kim Jong-un undertook. So clearly the China probably was not on board. But where do you see them? Do you see China and Russia diverging in terms of their support or not support for DPRK's nuclear program? Thanks.
Russian role is very, very critical. Without the Russian help, North Korea could have never developed the nuclear weapons capability. That's a fact. But Chinese role is very dubious. Okay? China didn't share its nuclear technology with North Korea. And also, if you look at the degree of a military cooperation between China and DPRK, it's very, very minimal. Other than personal exchange, there are no transfer of military weapons and equipment from China to North Korea. But now, how to deal with the current North Korea? There is a fundamental change. There has been fundamental changes since the adoption of joint statement of six-party talks in 2005. That one is this. Now, China used to pursue so-called three principles regarding the Korean Peninsula. First, peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Nuclear weapons-free Korean Peninsula. And also resolution of North Korean nuclear issues through dialogue and diplomacy. Okay? And as a subset of it, China has been proposing, okay, double suspension. South Korea, US suspend the joint military exercise and training. North Korea stop nuclear and missile activities. And the other one is a parallel approach of creation, the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. And third principle was so-called word for word, action for action. Okay? Those are the basic principles. But underlying all these principles is what? China really wanted the denuclearization of North Korea and the Korean Peninsula. But if you look at the recent statement coming from China, and even Russia, they tend to recognize North Korean nuclear weapons status as it is. And also they have been urging elimination of UN Security Council sanctions against North Korea. They have been arguing that the UN sanctions have not been working at all. Therefore, in other words, on the one hand, China and Russia seems to realize North Korea as a nuclear weapons country. At the same time, they have been raising futility of existing sanctions in North Korea. I don't know what will happen after war in Ukraine and war in Iran. And afterward, China particularly may come up with new proposals. Therefore, China-Russian position on North Korea has fundamentally changed since 2 years ago.
Yes, I'll take 2 questions. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I'm Marine from the Military Transformation Program at RSIS. I had a question that is a bit far away from maybe the main topic of the discussion, but recently we've seen South Korea investing a lot in disruptive technology in the military domain, especially AI. I think they announced like $7 billion investment to develop military AI. So I wanted to ask if South Korea see disruptive technologies like a strategic substitution tool instead of developing nuclear, investing more in emergent technologies and disruptive technologies, especially in the military domain. Thank you.
Hello, I'm a Master's in Asian Studies student from RSIS. And since your argument is that South Korea should essentially not go nuclear, I would like to know your stance on the South Korean military, the conventional military, and therein talk a little bit about the issues currently facing South Korean military, that is, reduction in its army strength due to population reduction, also US redeployment of sources. So, essentially a feeling that South Korea cannot completely trust the US. And lastly, majority of the South Korean army comprises of youth from ages 18 to 30 that are not really looking forward to a conventional hot conflict with North Korea. So what would be the stance if not to go nuclear for the South Korean government especially?
Marlene, as to your question, South Korean government is now giving utmost emphasis on the AI industry and atomic industry too. Because South Korean government wanted to export nuclear reactors. Okay, but our problem is what Westinghouse has loyalty over original technology of the South Korean version of APR 1400 reactor. If we pay up to almost 8% of our total sales volume as a loyalty to Westinghouse, that is one of the big problems. But therefore, South Korean government will be now paying great attention to AI and the nuclear, peaceful use of nuclear, energy, and also defense industry. And those have become the new so-called cutting-edge industry for South Korea. But I'm rather critical of South Korean government policy. Too much obsessed with AI. Okay, we got to think about the regulation of AI industry, but we are obsessed with the promotion of AI industry. And I think sooner or later we'll be encountering a lot of domestic, social, and political problems. Okay, therefore we got to pay more attention to what European countries are doing rather than what Americans and Chinese governments are doing. Okay, therefore, and also even defense industry, exporting defense industrial product has become new national pride in South Korea. I don't agree with it. Okay, we are exporting. Of course, we are mostly defensive. So-called interception, weapons like a Chunma. Whatever is the so-called ground-air interception weapons. Therefore, they argue that we are for defensive purposes. But, however, making money out of selling arms, weapons, not that desirable. And therefore, I have some different views on the government position. Okay, and your question is, you're talking about the autonomy of South Korean military.
Yeah. Basically, what will be the military reforms that the South Korean government should now take if the other choice is to not go nuclear?
Therefore, basically, as I pointed out, now the Pentagon talks about integrative deterrence. Therefore, integrated deterrence means what? Combining conventional deterrence with nuclear deterrence. Then there's a division of labor between the US and South Korea. South Korea handles conventional deterrence, while the US handles nuclear deterrence. Therefore, most recently, the United States has been pushing for South Korea to assume more responsibility. Therefore, last October, President Trump and President Lee Jae-myung met together. At that time, President Trump was very happy about President Lee Jae-myung's position. President Lee Jae-myung made it very clear. Yes, we'll have a greater responsibility for South Korean defense. Okay? Then U.S. provided nuclear deterrence and also some breaching capabilities which South Korea does not have. And more than that, South Korea is now calling for transfer of wartime operational capability. Given the existing agreement, when the DEFCON, defense condition, goes beyond level 3, then operational control of South Korean forces transfer to the American commander in South Korea. American forces only 26,000. South Korean forces 500,000. Then when the wartime arises in South Korea, an American commander which is commanding 26,000 forces will be controlling 500,000 South Korean forces. Okay? And also that contradicts with American demand for more South Korean role for defense of South Korea. Therefore, Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, and President Trump, they all agreed the idea of transfer of wartime operational control. And if there is a complete transfer of wartime operational control, then South Korea should go overall restructuring too. There has been criticism that South Korean forces have been too much dependent on American forces. Therefore, Korean generals cannot really exercise proper operational control and command and control over South Korean forces beyond division level. Because Americans are doing, they come up with operational plan, they have an orchestrating everything above the divisional level. That is why the German government is trying to get back wartime operational control, let the South Koreans military generals handle South Korean military forces. That is kind of new way, okay? Therefore, but let me go further. Therefore, the United States has been calling for modernization of ROK-US alliance, and it has 3 components. First component is South Korea assume more defense burden, from current level of 2.6% of GDP to 3.5% and ultimately 5% of GDP. And South Korea agreed to that. And also the US wants South Korea pay more to the defense cost related to American forces stationed in South Korea. We agreed to pay $1 billion per year. Okay? We agreed with the Biden administration. Now Trump wants to pay us to $10 billion per year. But we haven't agreed. Okay? We didn't accept the Trump proposal. That it will be like American forces will be machineries, okay? And then another important point was President Trump wanted South Korea to allow strategic flexibility doctrine of American forces in South Korea. That means what? American forces can move in, move out freely without consultation with South Korea. That is right now happening because now United States is now relocating its THAAD battery and the Patriot battery to Middle East just for the past 1 week. C-17 arrived in Korea and they're moving out, but without notifying South Korea. Okay, our government strongly opposed, but Americans lack those kinds of weapons in the Gulf. They are moving them to in the Gulf. Therefore, South Korea strongly opposed this strategic flexibility doctrine. Finally, the U.S. wants South Korea make a formal and explicit commitment to military support in the case of contingencies in Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. Of course, our government says no. Okay, therefore, allocate U.S. alliance is somewhat unstrained and under strain. Okay, but one thing is very clear: South Korean forces want to have a greater strategic autonomy. Okay, U.S. is willing to accommodate it. Okay, but American position is very clear. Okay, American support to South Korea will be decreasing, while they want South Korea pay greater responsibility for American defense, okay, and American forces. Therefore, there is a huge disparity, discrepancy between South Korean anticipation and American demand. I hope I answered your question. Okay.
I'm mindful of the time. I'll just have the last round of questions to Fook Wang as well as Sui.
Thank you. Han Fook Wang from RSIS. I think South Korea actually has done very well over the last 20, 30 years. Developing your economy. You have one of the most advanced economies in the world. South Korean companies are doing extremely well in very many fields. You've also been able to achieve this spectacular economic growth in addition to liberalizing your political system and making changes to it. So I can understand South Korea not wanting to change the status quo, right? In this stable, idealized world, you can continue to develop your economy, and not wanting to go nuclear, for example, which might destabilize the situation and bring South Korea into a very uncertain future. So in this sort of world that you live in, I'd like to ask you, what is your nightmare scenario which might bring South Korea into a very different world from the one that it has enjoyed over the last 20 to 30 years? And I just will throw out one of our ex-politicians said that the greatest global risk in the world today is not Iran or North Korea, it's US domestic politics, personified now by President Trump, who has, many people say, changed the new economic or new international order and so on. Is that something that you also are concerned about? But my main question is, what is the event or scenario that you, as a South Korean, fear the most that might change the world that you presently inhabit? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and we'll take the last question from Sui.
Thank you very much, Professor Moon. My name is Soo-Hyun Lee, Dr. Soo-Hyun Lee from RSIS. I'm a senior associate fellow and the head of the graduate studies. So I'd like to ask 2 questions regarding the public opinion in South Korea regarding the nuclear armament. And the other part is about your views on North Korea, respectively. So one thing I observed over the past 10 years is that I think in the public opinion, toward nuclearization is getting, pretty consolidated. And then I understand that there is a partisan difference among politicians, but if you look at the public opinions, regardless of the sources, whether it comes from NBC or Brookings, it shows that around 70% of the population, they say that they clearly support, South Korea go nuclear. One of my colleagues suggests that his survey experiment, failed because the magnitude of support is quite consistent, and even supporters, for the current government, around 50% of the supporters are showing very strong attitude toward Korea go nuclear. So my question is, Do you see any chances this in the public opinion will be translated into some kind of a policy options? I fully understand the current government very sensible commitment right now, but I also see suggestions from politicians have been elaborated further. One option is like nuclear hedging, suggests that we are willing to develop some capacity to prepare. So that's the question I have. And the other part is, this is where I like to ask for your expertise during your times in government. I wonder how we should perceive North Korea right now, because we have seen the historical summit between the US and Kim in Singapore, 2018. And then 2 years later, North Korea also exploded the liaison office for the two Koreas. So I see quite a fluctuations in the way in which North Korea communicate with others. And then the cyclical hawkish statement, from Kim Yo-jong, for instance, I begin to wonder whether they aim to speak to others or whether their messages are mainly to consolidate their power domestically. So I do appreciate your views on North Korea and its prospect. Thank you.
Okay, as to first question, what is the most nightmare scenario for South Korea? Obviously, outbreak of war on the Korean Peninsula. Okay? Therefore, a lot of people think about the ROK-US relation within that context. If America disengages from South Korea, North Korea will attack South Korea. If South Korea is committed to the contingencies in Taiwan Strait and South China Sea, there will be diversion of South Korean forces to that area. Then North Korea may engage in military adventurism against South Korea. But in the Korean context, for me, the most nightmarish one is this minor crashes in West Sea or demilitarized zone, or failed to control the situation, leading to escalation into nuclear conflict. As you all know, South Korea is far superior to North Korea in conventional forces. North Korea is very weak. Then the only way for North Korea to deal with it, you use the tactical nuclear card. Then if North Korean regime is endangered, North Korea may well use tactical nuclear weapons. Then more than 20 million population is concentrated within 60 kilometers from the front line. Okay? It's so concentrated. Therefore, we're extremely vulnerable. Window of vulnerability exists for South Korea, not North Korea. Pyongyang is at least 200 kilometers away from front line. Between, Kaesong is, there's heavy concentration, but still, compared with Seoul, it's nothing. Therefore, between Seoul, Kaesong and Pyongyang, there's Sariwon. Other than that, it's virtually nothing there. Therefore, window of vulnerability is much smaller for North Korea. That is current situation in Korea. Therefore, I think the President Lee Jae-myung is very well aware of the situation. Therefore, he has been arguing that tension reduction, confidence building measures through preventive diplomacy should be number one priority. Therefore, he has been arguing that winning war is important. However, winning without going through war is better. But the best is to create condition for peace in which there is no need to fight between the North and the South. He even argued that ugly peace is better than winning war. Therefore, Lee Jae-myung has been very much committed to the cause of peace. I don't know whether and how he will create that kind of condition, but given that one, and Lee Jae-myung is very well aware of the precarious nature of peace and security on the Korean Peninsula. Going to the Professor Lee's comment and question about the public opinion on nuclear, I explained it, and there is Professor Park Jong-hee at the Seoul National University. He came up with a very interesting paper with his student. That is what? when they conduct a survey on the public attitude toward the nuclear weapons, 60-70% support the idea of South Korea going nuclear. And then they added in experimental design that if we go to nuclear, then we'll be subject to the international sanctions. Then our economy will be suffering a lot. Then ratio goes down to 40%. Okay? Therefore, in other words, information and education are very, very important. If the cost of going nuclear is too high, and if it is shared with among Korean citizens, and those number who are supporting independent nuclear path goes down radically. And also, overall environment matters. When inter-Korean relations get better, Trump was talking with Kim Jong-un, then the ratio of those who support the independent nuclear path goes down. Therefore, all this data, of course, in the conservative views, those data, more than 70% of South Korean people support the independent nuclear path. Therefore, we should deliberate that option. But all this design, it has something to do with the design of questionnaire. Therefore, it should not be taken for granted or taken for deterministic. Okay. As to your question on the North Korean behavior, like China, North Korea has been always reactive rather than proactive. Because I attended all 4 Korean summits. Okay, I know Kim Il-sung personally too, had quite extensive talk with her during dinner place and etc. I would say that they are under siege mentality. North Korean elite think they are surrounded by enemies, and enemies are strangulating their neck. Okay, and how to survive is their goal. Therefore, their position is very simple. Okay, how to ensure survival. That in that process, again, people matter in North Korea too. Okay, North Korean messages to a large extent is for North Korean domestic audience, not foreign audience. Therefore, it is, as a North Korean specialist, we should be very, very careful whether those messages for domestic audience in North Korea or foreign audience. Okay? For those messages for foreign audience, then they're only reported in Korea Central News Agency, 조선중앙통신. Okay? They are not reported in 노동신문. Okay? If those messages for the domestic audience, they are most reported in Central Korean News Agency as well as the 노동신문. Okay? Therefore, we should be very careful how North Korea uses the outlet for their messaging. And then you got to tell whether it's for domestic audience, foreign audience, or both. In that way, you can find out. But again, I'm repeating, North Korean response has always been reactive rather than proactive. They have been responding to outside actions and words. It's very rare for North Korea to take a proactive position. But that is, unavoidable consequence of their, overall setting. Okay, as I pointed out, North Korea has been under siege mentality, and when you are in siege mentality, you tend to be reactive rather than proactive.
Thank you so much, Prof. Moon. I'm actually glad to know that the South Koreans are actually very rational and pragmatic. And basically, I can still continue to go and visit South Korea. I would like to, on this note, we know the time is running out, and it's been very interesting to hear from you, your points of views, and just like you all to just join me in thanking Prof. Moon for his.
Thank you
very much. Thank you for your time, sir.